I'm really just chairing the session. Good morning, everyone. Hope you had a good coffee break. And it's really, we're welcoming our panelists who we're looking forward to hearing, not least because of their diversity of experience and perspectives. So this panel is called Doing STEAM, Doing Things Differently. And at the outset, Clayton Shaw, who's also on this panel and program manager for STEAM, talked about how STEAM was STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, but with arts and creativity at the center of that. So we're at this interesting space where we've now got a physical space in Digbeth on the high street, which now over the coming months and years, we're going to try and shape together and decide what exactly we mean by doing STEAM here in the region in Birmingham, but also wider afield as well. When we were first putting this panel together, and Laura and Helga and I were having conversations, or Laura and I were having conversations, we were talking about STEAM, doing diversity differently. And I said, that's interesting. But actually, diversity is that word which certainly comes up throughout the day. It's come up in various aspects of our professional lives. It's come up at least a number of times, not least in the keynote as well, but also at the outset in terms of Helga, Laura, and Clayton's framing. But also, as I'm sure you know, these are quite well rehearsed, but I think we do need to remind ourselves that word diversity comes with it a set of baggage. It comes with it as a series of history. And that history, broadly, is, are we now at that point where this is about inclusion now? So diversity is, at the one point, meant to be celebrating inclusion, but are we actually there? So it was interesting to hear David's thoughts and counting that history of the 70s and 80s, regionalising it between London and Birmingham in broad strokes, but reminding us of some of the issues that are affecting us and are still here. And actually, some of the order of the day is, how do we deal with issues of discrimination, access? There's a lot of work now that, yes, creative industries are some nice, shiny, happy places, but how are these still prescribed or inscribed by some of the issues, the old modern issues of race, gender, class, and ethnicity? So I think this is a moment absolutely to say, yes, we are here, hello culture, but actually we are here, and where do we want to go with this? And there's some work to be done whilst we're in this place of here. So what is here now, and how do we logistically make that operationalized for different people trying to diversity? Or actually, is it business as usual with similar kind of suspects showing their beautiful faces on the glossy brochures, as it were? So with those of kind of my introduction, I'm a Professor of Cultural Studies and Creative Industries here at BCU in the School of Media, and one of my roles is acting as the cross-faculty lead for ADM with STEAMhouse. So this is an opportunity for me and my colleagues who have been working in, if you like, conventional but practice-based academic ways to think about, what does STEAMhouse mean for us? Is this another new agenda the university wants us to come on board with? Or actually, is this a really exciting new crossroads, a new opportunity where some of our existing practices as scholars, as artists, as practitioners, as those of us interested in equality and opportunity, there I've said that word, and not diversity, how do we bring that into a place such as STEAMhouse whilst we're thinking about these new kinds of work? So hopefully some of these issues will come out in their own but also unique ways, and we're really pleased that we have on our panel today, so we have Clayton Shaw, who's the program manager for STEAMhouse. We have Florence Okoye, who's the user experience designer of AfroFutures UK, Anita Shervington, who's the director of Community Perspective CIC, and André, Reid, Kiondo. So I'm going to invite them individually because they'll be speaking from the podium here, so we don't all have to stretch from the panel looking at the presentation. So they'll all speak to 5 minutes, and I'll try and keep them to 5 minutes, and then we'll all come here and kick off the Q&A. So can I invite Clayton Shaw, first of all, to start proceedings? Thank you.
Right, you've heard me talking about STEAMhouse already, so I'm not going to talk about STEAMhouse now. I'm going to talk about an organisation that I came across on a recent visit to Chicago. It's called Blue 1647, and here are two of the founders of Blue 1647, Emile Cambry and Tracy Powell. You can imagine my surprise when I realised they weren't women. But Blue 1647, I'll just give you a bit of a background to it. It was founded because, am I on? You can hear me? Okay. It was founded because there was a belief that in an era where we're faced with historical levels of education and economic disparities, the time to just talk about the problems in communities was over. And this place, this Blue 1647, I should mention, is located in an area of out of town Chicago in a very multicultural district of the well, Chicago land, as it's called, I'll move over here. It's in a particular part of the area of Chicago, but it has a very high Latino, this is really unnerving, Latino, and I would call it African Caribbean population. People of colour, as they would call them. So there are a couple of entrepreneurial individuals. They decided to take tangible and sustainable action. And over the years, Blue 1647 became one of the fastest growing organisations to ever reach over 17,000 students trained in technology in the US. This year, they became the first minority-owned national US Department of Labour certified apprenticeship program in software development, while becoming a part of the White House Tech Hire Initiative, training more minorities for tech careers. They've impacted the lives of thousands of families, starting the first community wireless network in a housing development, providing Wi-Fi to the entire housing development community, while also providing exemplary advanced high-tech STEM training and educational services to federal housing developments. They've had students acquire hardware and software certifications, enabling them to reach beyond their potential and join highly coveted, high-paying technical careers in prestigious companies such as Google. Additionally, they've had students receive scholarships to prestigious universities and receive funding for their ventures. And this is their mission. So the mission is to create understanding where there is none, to provide educational access to those who lacked the means, and to become a blueprint for positive economic development. And they seek to change the world for the better, starting at the ground level in our communities. Sorry, can I go back to the slide, sorry? Some of the things that they do, just as a quick rundown, they support Latino and African Caribbean students. They have a Girls for Code. They bridge, they're bridging the tech gap in underserved communities, bringing together urban youth to learn how to code through civic-minded challenges. They do mobile app development, web programming, design training, where every participant will work with one another and join in a spirit of collaboration and learning. And they connect talent, professional people, empowering them to create, develop, and innovate. So when thinking about the question earlier on, which Rajinder posed around the challenges and opportunities, I think what's clear here is that there are many possibilities to what can be achieved. But what are the challenges? And Blue 1647 states it's a vehicle for social change that dedicates all of its time, energy, and resources to accomplishing precisely that social change. They're a community of tireless workers that aim to make the world a better place. And I'd go beyond that to say that they have entrepreneurialism running through their DNA. So some of the things that I observed that it's possible to turn challenges into opportunities, that if you give people the opportunities to learn and progress, they'll take it. Allowing the community to co-design, co-curate activities makes the content relevant. And allowing people to come in and teach the kids too, that was another thing that they do, adds relevancy. And embracing a spirit of entrepreneurialism. And the US seems to be full of fighters and go-getters, and they can really get things done. So admittedly, we know it's a different culture when it comes to things like funding models. It's less state support and more philanthropic support. However, there seems to be more of an entrepreneurial approach, perhaps out of necessity. I know locally we have entrepreneurs that work in the region, but just posing a question back, is how can we create the conditions to create more meals and more traces locally here? Okay.
To spare, so thank you very much.
Okay.
That's brilliant, wonderful. Florence, please. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. Firstly, is the mic okay? Yes. Excellent, cool. Yes, as was explained before, by trade, I'm a user experience and service designer. And kind of the way we tend to work is we always like to look at the data. What does the data actually tell us first? So excuse me whilst I hopefully, well, yeah, I probably will slightly bore you with these facts, but I think they're really interesting and pertinent facts to consider in light of this particular question. So for me, actually, kind of giving my bias away, I think at the core of this is actually a question about data. The core of this question, what are the challenges and possibilities? In order to understand the possibilities that can arise from these challenges, well, we need to understand where we actually are, what the situation is. And actually, it's a really interesting, weird, and quite complicated situation in the UK. So if we look at the STEM side of it, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, we have this really weird contradictory system. So on the one hand, we've got particular areas, so say engineering. Currently in the UK, about 9% of engineers are women. When we look at, say, engineering apprenticeships, we're seeing about 4 to 5% are women, which kind of doesn't really bode well for the engineering industry in that sense. So what, are we going to see kind of less diversity in terms of gender? And it's interesting is actually that most of the data at the moment is incredibly binary. So it's not even able to account for people who are non-binary. Across science, even though overall, actually, if we consider the whole of the science industry as such, it actually has a high proportion of, say, women who are employed, so just over 50%, which is kind of an interesting comparison to some of the non-scientific workforce, where women make about 45%. Actually, when we look at, say, particular sectors within the scientific industries, what we're seeing is that say, again, in engineering, you're getting less than 10%, ditto with aeronautical and mechanical engineering. And similarly, in terms of the physics or, for example, the energy sector, again, we're seeing these kind of really disparate kind of proportions, say, and that's simply in terms of, say, gender representation. We also know from a lot of research that's been done that, say, women in science are the ones who are less likely to continually pursue a career in science owing to institutional sexism, which is often apparent both in terms of pay grades and the way the scientific industry tends to deal with, say, maternity leave. If we look at, say, issues of access of ability, again, disabled people are massively underrepresented as a workforce in STEM, although in honesty, on a similar level to many other areas. Now, what's also, if we're looking then more at, say, representation of ethnicity, what we're finding, say, a couple of years ago, it was found that whilst around a quarter of engineering graduates in the UK are from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, when it actually comes to the workforce, we've seen that massively reduced to 6%. What's going on? Plenty of us are going to study, none of us want to actually work in these areas. Why? It's interesting as well, overall, Black and minority ethnic workers make up about 10% of the overall scientific workforce, and that's according to a report done by the Royal Society about diversity within science. And again, this really wavers and goes back and forth. In construction, it's around 5%. In the energy sector, it's about 7%. So we have this interesting situation where overall, if we're trying to think about diversity and inclusion in terms of, say, the science industry, we are kind of represented, actually. We're kind of seeing equivalent proportionalities. But the issue is that these differ massively depending on the very different sectors. And there isn't really any consistent effort or consistent understanding of why this is and how this can be solved. And as I kind of hinted earlier, we don't really have data about those liminal spaces either, and this is why I was mentioning the issue of data. Because as I've said, these stats I've just blinded you with are incredibly high level when you think about it, especially if you're trying to come at this from an intersectional perspective. Because after all, we don't have any real data about how many Black and minority ethnic women are engineers, how many Black and minority ethnic LGBTQ recent refugees or asylum seekers have made it to actually created career within tech. And actually, when we often talk about these issues of representation within science, we often ask ourselves, maybe people just aren't interested in it. That's wrong. There's plenty of research to show that up until GCSE, kids are really interested in science. They respect it. They see it as something that's actually kind of worthy to get into. Parental encouragement is also right there, but then something happens when it comes to actually trying to either study it at university and then going off to actually create a real career in it. There's this disconnect. And again, we just don't really have the data to actually understand why that is. And again, so I think that's definitely a potential opportunity. But I kind of also very quickly want to balance that out because we're talking about STEAM and we're talking about the arts. So what do the arts look like? And there, and perhaps unsurprisingly as a designer, I think actually we have some truly shocking statistics. Because actually, for example, overall, like it's massively white, around 60% of the roles within the supposed arts and cultural sector are carried out by white men. And this varies as well from like around 70% within the purely digital sector to down to 33% in, say, the charitable and community sector as well. And overall, again, BAME are making up about 11% of people working in the creative industries. But again, this massively depends. If it's the fashion industry, then it's actually, again, massively underrepresented. And what's also quite interesting across both of these particular sectors, the arts and the science, is that purportedly what we're seeing is that there are BAME within, say, senior roles and within the junior roles, but again, there's this disconnect in the middle roles. So something is happening to make the people who start and get into these careers then leave. And again, this is something that I think is the heart of the question before we kind of get all kind of like romantic and kind of like do all this blue sky thinking. Let's actually look at the data. There's real interesting intersectional and complex issues. So as we're talking about STEAM, sorry, so this, and I'm kind of running over time, but like just to wrap up, I kind of feel like there's a whole host of problems that have been identified with the way we educate around both the arts, about business, about science within this country. I sort of feel like if one of the problems that we as a country have is that we tend to specialize too early, especially when you compare ourselves to the United States, perhaps an intersectional approach towards programming, towards educational programming could be a way of blurring the distinctions that are being made already at quite an early stage in the classroom. Could it be that actually organizations like STEAM Lab, like BOM, like Mad Lab, like all these impact hubs, could it be that they also provide tangible, long-term approaches, providing means for students to explore the other options that they simply can't at school owing to the way our educational system is set up? And research by the Wellcome Trust, it shows that it's these kind of long-term interventions, not cute things like STEM ambassadors that come in one day a year into primary school. It's the long-term interventions that are the things that are really, truly required. It's also interesting if we're looking again at our cousins across the pond, they already have actually in a sense, a historical wealth of institutions like historically black colleges and universities, which we simply don't have. So there are so many opportunities just waiting for us to explore, but I really feel at the heart of it is actually just simply looking at the data and really grappling with the fact that what's missing is a truly intersectional and a truly, I guess, inclusive way of actually understanding the different issues from socioeconomic factors to race to institutionalized racism, sexism, and homophobia. All of these things that combine, and it can impede anything that we might try to do to genuinely make STEAM a more diverse place.
Thank you, Florence. We'll take this up in the panel. Thank you.
No, it's okay. I'll just, oh yeah, no, you're next.
Could I invite Anita Shervington, please? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Is this a place to stand?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Okay, hi everyone. So I'm a public engagement strategist and community organiser, especially a community organiser. And my work, I think, brings me to the intersection of science and social justice and culture and creativity. I'm the director of Community Perspectives, which is a social impact organisation, very much in incubation stage. And its mission is to really accelerate equity within and through STEM. So within being who's there, access to opportunities, but also through the difference that I think we can make through STEM. And I have a Wellcome Trust Engagement Fellowship that is going to and is enabling me to really develop and take this work forward. Okay, so my my background is mainly in community health, spanning nutrition, women's health, maternal nutrition in particular, but also women's political empowerment and also working in the culture and heritage sector as well. And all of these elements show up in the way that I do my STEM programming. It's in fact my interest in health that has led me to become more interested in science. And as that interest grew, I would attend conferences and eventually science festivals and all these sort of informal spaces to learn about the latest research. Increasingly, I noticed that often I was the only one in the room. I couldn't see myself there. And I thought that was pretty lonely, actually. And most of all, I was concerned that with all these amazing things happening to inspire people around science and technology, that wasn't reaching all communities. And so I kind of got a little bit jealous about that, actually, and thought, how can I do something about that? So I started to become curious about the STEM ecosystem, who's doing what, where does the money come from, how does it all take place, who's missing. And I started to experiment with organising my own events that were very much framed around the audiences that I wanted to engage with, which in particular was the Black community, because I felt that that's where I could make the most difference. I have context experience being Black myself, and in particular, those were the faces that I saw missing at some of these events. So what do I press?
Just the right one.
The right one. Okay, so I applied for a Winston Churchill travelling fellowship and went to various places. I went to visit projects in Toronto, the USA, especially around Oakland and San Francisco, different parts of California, and Guyana, South America. And what I was looking for, I wanted to meet with organizations that were being led by the communities that were traditionally left behind and left out of these things. And so Guyana in particular was interesting because it's in South America. It borders Brazil, Venezuela, and Suriname. But it's actually part of the Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean. It was a British slave colony. In fact, my dad is from Guyana. And I wanted to go along and see this a project called STEM Guyana, which was some of the diaspora that live in America felt concerned that there was nothing outside of school that gave Guyanese children the opportunity to learn about STEM in informal spaces. And so they really got together and started a sort of philanthropic movement, which I'm very interested in as well. Connected with the government. That's the lady in the striped dress is the First Lady, the President's wife. And they really clubbed together businesses, schools, etc., and sent a group out to train people so they could deliver out-of-school STEM programs. And in particular, it's after Haiti, it's actually the poorest country in the region, and so that's a key thing as well. How do you do these things in under-resourced spaces? Okay, so what does some of what I do look like? So you can't really, the lighting's a bit. You can't really see this, but this is Black STEAM. This year will be its 5th year. And this is an example of 2016. It was supported by the FRSA. Most of what I've done actually has been self-supported and just tapping into the people that helped to make it happen. In fact, Florence graced us with her presence back in 2015. And what this is about role modeling. It's about shining the spotlight on Black people working in STEM and the arts. And it's really storytelling. They take us on a 20-minute journey of their lives. It starts with baby photographs. And it's to give the intergenerational audience an example of how do we spark interest and curiosity and nurture and create that enabling environment for people to go into those professions if they're interested. Okay, so there's a film clip here. How do I do that?
You ready?
Yep. Again, you can't see it very well, but this is an example of what the event's about. So it's just short storytelling pieces, but it's also, it's arts and culture as well. So this is an African drumming performance, obviously, but we've had, people performing hip-hop, dance performances, and so it's a very cultural occasion as well. So that's about to end. Okay, so it's about the role model effect. Does anybody know who this is? Yes. Who is it? Yeah. I have a prize for you. How about now? Yeah?
Yes.
Star Trek. Now, apparently there was a moment where she was considering leaving Star Trek, but Martin Luther King contacted her and asked her not to do it and pointed out how important that role was, and basically that's what we were fighting for, to be able to, for people to see, black people to see themselves outside of the frame that has been created for them. And so she stayed, and NASA employed her to go around and inspire women around the possibilities in sort of space science. And Mae Jemison apparently was one of those children that was inspired. And this is a sort of photographic campaign. Because of them, we can. And what this is showing, what I'm trying to show here, is how important it is for that representation. A friend of mine, Natasha Henry, has come up with representation creates inspiration. And to go a step further, inspiration creates aspiration. Yeah. Can I have 30 seconds more?
Go on then, quickly, please.
So it's not enough just to show role models. That's really important. But we need to get into it, get our hands dirty, and have a go. And Blastfest, I piloted it last year. It's a space where all people can explore science and technology through black arts and culture. It works with what exists already in communities. So this ran alongside Manchester Caribbean Carnival. And we had a couple of days with a big marquee with all sorts of people contributing to that hands-on, sort of superficial but engaging, fun activities around STEM. And the idea for this is that it will grow and be in different cities alongside what already exists, very much using community organising and appreciative inquiry and tapping into the cultural assets importantly. And my final slide is that because I'm doing this kind of on my own in terms of spearheading it, but very much drawing on lots of people. I can't do it without other people contributing. But to guide me, I definitely use the Sustainable Development Goals. It helps me to put forward the argument of, the strapline is leave nobody behind, and that's what I'm trying to do. Especially Goal 17 is important for this, to create this collaborative advantage and collective impact. And also, it is, after all, the International Decade for People of African Descent, in case you didn't know. And that's me.
Nice point to start. Thank you very much. Undoubtedly, we'll take up more of this in the panel Q&A. And finally, the artistic gent, who is André Reid. Thank you very much.
Cool. Yeah, I'm André. Cool. I'll lead that as well. Yep. Thank you, Anita, as well. I think a lot of what you're working on is inspiring because I think from my own perspective, a lot of the work I've been doing for the last few years has been about providing opportunities for myself and for other people where I haven't had the access to. And a lot of that difficulty has come out of, I think, part of the social frames that are put on us as having to frame ourselves as this is a black person or an African person or a Caribbean person, and the economic and financial disparities that are kind of cause and effect of that. So this year I've been developing a community-led platform called Kiondo. Kiondo is a Swahili word. It originates in Kenya from the Kikuyu people. And it's a word that means basket, and it's a basket that's made by the community. And the reason why my company is called that is because we're trying to incorporate the philosophy of community-led design. So I've started to look into how do we bring together people to actually co-design and create the world around them, using design as an inspiration, as a tool of power, as a tool of agency over the places that we live. So Kiondo ourselves, we try to encourage this by introducing things such as open source design, encouraging it, introducing modular design. So for me, that's simple information, simple jargon. But I come from an architectural background, and what modular means is really just something really simple to put together, like a jigsaw puzzle. What we try to do is basically say, this is possible. This is possible in the place that you live. And how do you make the spaces that you live in productive spaces? So we look at digital fabrication and the process of actually bringing in micro factories, fabrication units into the spaces which you work in, into the spaces that you live, and making those things, I think, something that will give you wealth, give you some sort of income, and also empower the people in your community to build things around them. So this is an example of just simply putting a 3D printer in your home, on your desk, and supporting someone else by printing something. This is an example of a co-working space, a library, or some kind of institution where someone has introduced a CNC and has decided to build, I don't know, tables, chairs, anything. This is an example of probably something similar to STEAMhouse as well, a makerspace where what you're seeing now is a lot of a curation of organizations and people coming together, especially in the arts, to build spaces where people can experiment with the arts, experiment with technology, learn things, develop skills, and actually serve the spaces around them. And what Kiondo is looking to do and is working towards is how do these kind of spaces and how do these elements within the urban infrastructure come together and provide some sort of system or network in order to produce this kind of factory system, a system where a manufacturing system where things come together and it's productive for more than just your local community, but for the region, the country, wherever. So that's my last slide, and I'll go into a bit more about the question. I think this is a beautiful thing, and if you've looked over the last few years, there's been a huge transition with artists being labeled, I think, like the new makers. They're the creatives, especially of this city. And there's a certain trajectory towards how do we make these artists the new micro-manufacturers, the people that actually are driving the economy within the UK. There's a big question, and God, I've got a note on my phone that I need to read out. So if you give me a minute. Looking towards the benefits of this kind of economy and this kind of system, and how it provides opportunities for local businesses to grow. It allows schools to come in and people to learn and experiment with technology. But then there's some undertones to this as well. It's who are the makers, who can afford it, what are the resources that bind this to society. There's reports that are coming out now where people are actually looking at maker culture as a form of gentrification, similar to the artist-led gentrification that happened a few years ago. So I've got a statement from one of those pieces, actually. I've got two statements. I'll read the first one out. This one is by Caitlin Ann Cunningham, and it's in a publication called Conflicted Commons. It says, DIY at best, and that's in reference to makerspaces, embodies a revolutionary exodus from the capitalist division of labor and its attendant hierarchies of elite expertise and inaccessible technologies. At worst, it becomes an institutionalized as a business or non-profit organization. Okay. And the second, I'll just get that up for you. This is the problem with tech. It's never where you want it to be. The other one is, who are the makers? They're young, they're white people, the sort who build up startups and attend expensive, pointless pop-ups, and don't worry about the community in which we're already there. So those are the statements I want to leave you with. So when we go to the panel, I'd love to share a bit more.
Thank you all very much. I know what a tall order it is to be given 5 minutes, and I know some of us just went slightly, but those are very important points, which we're now going to collectively share and discuss more. So could I invite my panelists to come and join me on these colourful chairs? Well, first of all, thank you all to the panelists again for really interesting, diverse range of perspectives, but also sharing your experiences as well. And the question for those of you who've had a chance to look at the programme, but those of you who haven't, the question posed was, with STEAMhouse at Birmingham City University now a reality, and with your collective experiences of working in STEM and Black STEAM-related environments, what are the challenges and possibilities of doing diversity in our sectors? And in kind of related but also different ways, the panelists spoke to that. And I just want to kind of slightly elaborate that on the first question, and then I'm just going to straight away open it up to the floor after they've had a chance to respond. Is in the UK context, I think it's very fair to say that STEAM is a relatively new concept. It's been around for perhaps maximum several years, but it's only really in the last few years that it's perhaps grown. And it was interesting, Anita, in your example of having a kind of a variant on that with Black STEAM. So the fact that we still need a Black STEAM is an interesting point in itself. But we're also at a crossroads there where we can draw on STEM experience from North America, where it is much more established right the way through to, if you like, our equivalent of GCSE curriculum. And of course, as we saw in Latin America, in the Caribbean, there are variants of it there. So a kind of a take on that question, what are the challenges and possibilities, just to kind of bring that home a bit, at this crossroads moment where STEAM is new, it's exciting, it's possible, but it also comes with a set of baggages, the baggages of discrimination. The data is also telling us that we need to do more hard work. So at this moment, who are the people that we need to work together with, sit up and listen, and what kind of work do we perhaps collectively need to do in terms of thinking about these challenges and possibilities? So a bit of a broad and ambitious question, but I invite you to kind of come at that as you will. Who'd like to go first?
I can't resist, sorry, yeah. I'm kind of in a bit of one of those moods. I promise I'm actually much more reasonable usually.
Tell it like it is.
So the big challenge, I think, is just dishonesty. I think we in the UK are really, really dishonest about the nature of our society and the way it's come and the way it's come to where it is now. We're still really, really just crap at talking about classism, about talking about the fact that schools can't even provide that. So state schools, who are all meant to be working to similar standards or be working to similar curricula, still cannot provide their students the same sort of educational levels, right? So we're talking about inclusion. Well, how can you have any kind of inclusion in any industry when your educational system is literally hostage to a bizarro political system that decides to intervene and meddle and mess around? You know, we're talking about, okay, how can we bring STEAM, how can we bring the arts and technology into the classroom? And, you know, some of my best friends are teachers, and honestly, I would not ask any more from teachers. They're already having to be sociologists, they're already having to be psychologists and therapists, they're not getting any funding, they're not getting any support from the government, and this is a consistent thing of just government by government. So, of course, yes, I'm a massive red, lefty, whatever, but even I can say, yeah, Labour has its own, like, a portion of blame here as well, because it's set up this trend, this idea that somehow education is ripe for the taking and ripe to be held hostage by the political establishment. So I'm really interested in these institutional problems. It's so important, yes, to go from the bottom up, but let's also apportion the correct level of responsibility at each level. And one of the big problems is simply the fact that it's hard to try to bring this into the actual educational system when the educational system is literally being held hostage, you know?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go to Anita and I'll come to the other two gents. Anita?
Well, I think in regards to the sort of the out of school STEM space, I think who gets to lead, who gets to decide, who gets the resources, that's an issue for me. I think that more and more, I think when people are applying for funding, you know, there's definitely that piece where you can say, well, you know, we're going to engage the hard to reach and that kind of thing, and it feels as if it's some sort of tick box. But then when people deliver their projects, if they don't reach, that sounds a bit echoey, doesn't it? If they don't reach certain groups, there's no sort of accountability. It's just a thing. It's this curtain. The term hard to reach, I mean, I don't believe in hard to reach. I think it depends who you are, how you're doing it, and why you're doing it, the intention. And if it's always the certain kinds of people that are the ones to allow you in or to feed you, put your hands down, let me feed you. It feels like there's this child-adult relationship that poor communities you know, we're going to engage them, we're going to help them. You know, it's imperialistic, it's no change. It's like a micro version of what we see, you know, who are the solution holders. And for me, I think all the creativity and the love and everything that's needed exists in communities already. What lacks is the resources, and whoever it is that decides it's allowed to happen. You know, some of the things that we talk about now in terms of the need for diversity and inclusion, they're not new things. The communities have been saying these things since we got here, but now it's, you know, who gives that permission? Earlier on, David, you mentioned, you talked about Vanley Burke a lot, and you talked about him being recognised as one of, you know, the great photographers of this country. Who is it that needs to recognise that? Who is it that decides? Because we think he is that, don't we? You know, so it's you know, for me, it's something around that, and everything that I'm trying to do, and I'm learning as I go, is like I said, is tapping into the cultural assets, is centering the margins, you know, and the love piece that I mentioned, that emotional, being connected in that way is the ultimate advantage, I think, of creating change in your own community.
Yeah. I think that visual illustration of those goals was really interesting, quite poignant. André?
Well, I think there's a lot to go around diversity and whether it's who needs the diversity and who is it going to empower. I think one of my big queries about the question and just how to answer it was if we need this black STEM and what is it, and the term black and how it's associated and framed in our society, and how it's kind of used as a proxy for kind of discrimination and attribution, to the sense of when you look at community and a black person says community, it's a very different thing from when a white person says community. And it's a very different thing when you say community in general, if you come from an institutionalized sense to when you're coming from bare bones on the ground with the guys there doing the work. And that's a big thing, I think, from my background in architecture, looking at like community spaces and looking at how things are brought together within the urban fabric. It's very difficult to really look at how to bring people together when there are these barriers, and they're structurally formed in a layer in society where, what's the way to put it? You can't put it politely, really, can you? It's just wrong. Like you said, it's dishonest, for one. There's a lot of dishonesty going on. There is a lot of... okay.
Go for it, man.
I don't know.
He's getting ready.
I had a conversation over the break, and it was an example of like how we look at society, and like for example in medicine, for the sense that we use race as a proxy for treatment, and that's completely false, because race doesn't define your ancestry or your biology. So that's something that we frame for medicine, and we've developed tools for that. And in society, we've developed a load of tools for that to deal with other areas of how we distribute finance, how we distribute economics, resources, everything throughout the whole thing. So when it comes to people actually starting to do their own thing and do things in STEM, we look at them taking up jobs and resources. Basically, I see jobs as a form of institutionalized slavery. We don't allow people to actually live out the lives that they want. We're just asking them to serve the society and the economy, which doesn't necessarily always work for them. So when we look at people that are trying to start their own businesses, start their own practices where they're actually doing things with the people that they love, with the things that they care about, then we get this kind of bias that they need to fit into a box, they need to fit into something that already exists, and they also need to appease somebody. Like you said, that's just spoon feeding them a bit of resources here, there, and that's not really right. So I think there's a lot to say around that.
Thank you, appreciate it. Clayton.
A lot of interesting discussions so far. Just on the...
I'm going to have this throughout the day, don't worry, it's going to come and go.
There's some of the terminologies as well. Just think about, I was talking about this with somebody not so long ago. It's like even the word empowerment, I think there's some of the terminologies that we have to be quite careful of. Because it's like empowerment, so who is doing the empowerment and who is receiving that ability to be empowered. It's almost like already it has some kind of level of control and power structure and political structure already. So I think even some of the terminology that we use when we're talking about how we work in this area, we probably need to examine that a bit more, just to kind of really think about how we are engaging with people to kind of develop skills, develop core skills, and that's something that hopefully we're doing over at STEAMhouse as well. So I just wanted to mention as well something else that somebody mentioned to me, and this was around that kind of idea around soft skills, and that's some of the things that we're trying to do more of and develop more soft skills. But when I was talking to this individual, and they were saying, well, they would treat soft skills more like core skills. So that's the idea about working across disciplines, working in teams, working in, with people that are from outside of your kind of area of expertise. They're actually very core skills. And I think those are some of the opportunities that we can try and develop a bit more when it comes to kind of developing a kind of STEAM or kind of interdisciplinary team-based activity.
Okay, thank you. The floor is open. Comments, observations, questions? There you go.
No, just, sorry, a lot of what has been said is predicated on the ideology that it's always being measured against society. I think you said, where are we? And you put a lot of statistics around how we're faring against the rest of society. And you yourself said that you're putting its organizations and how we're trying to attract sort of funding. We should attract our own funding, I think. Is it Anita? Yeah. The work that you're doing, I think that is where would be the most impactful. Adding the sort of HCP, historically black, university sort of way that Americans have gone about it, where they've said we're not measuring against anybody else. We're going to do this ourselves. It doesn't matter what anybody else is thinking or how society views us. We're not asking them for anything. We're going to create it ourselves, educate ourselves, and then try to hire ourselves to create our own economy, which is where, if you look at Atlanta, you have sort of like 76% HBU, or historically black university graduates, having their own businesses, supplying their own businesses. I think that is an ideology that Britain kind of has missed out. We've kind of not done that. That needs more unity to actually do that, where it starts with things that we have to do with ourselves, instead of saying, well, what are they doing? How are we not getting this from the government? They're not going to give it to us, it's obvious. It's 50 years, I mean, I'm probably older than you, so I'm in my mid-40s, and my parents will probably tell, you know, your generation, it's not going to happen. It's not in their interest. And as you can see, things aren't getting better, they're kind of getting worse. So the funding for sort of things like that is not in the interest of the greater society. So I think we have to just ignore that and just work on what we're doing going forward.
Thank you very much for that comment. And then we'll take this grey top there. Thank you. Just up there, the hands there. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. That was really fascinating, the whole discussion. My point is really to follow up on Florence, what you were saying about just the education system, kind of, you know, the institutional education system just not educating people with enough information to be able to process what's happening or to understand. You know, it's like it is the curriculum. So completely, you know, I really love your discussion about the grassroots thing, but also the fact it needs to be at this level, and the fact that we do not talk about class enough as well, and how it's all interrelated. Misogyny, they're all kind of related to those things. And I had another point which has just escaped me. But really, yeah, it was just that about, yeah, also foreign languages, how bad we are at learning foreign languages. And when you learn a foreign language, you learn a different way of articulating yourself. You understand what it is to learn a foreign language, to be foreign, to not understand, to kind of feel stupid when you're learning a foreign language. And you learn so much more than just the language. You learn about culture and all sorts of things. And so these things, if we can get better at learning foreign languages and understand why we're not learning about colonialism. I mean, I live in Germany partly. I've lived in Germany for 10 years. It's the equivalent to Germans not knowing about Nazism. You know, why is that not, and it's not in the curriculum if you're in a posh school or if you're in the school down the road. What is this, you know, and how on earth can we possibly make decisions about anything, not understanding that? How come we've got all our imperial statues celebrating the colonial era all over all of our cities in the whole of this country? And I've got American friends who come to London and go, how the hell can you stand to walk around with all this celebration to the, you know, the colonies of you know, those parts of the world being part of the, you know, being ruled by Britannia. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. So, you know, I mean, I think public statues, that's one of my current things, but yeah.
Thank you.
Anyway,
thank you for those two comments. We do have to wrap it there, but the conversation will go on. Can we please thank our panelists again for really stirring conversation?